guys, welcome back to Rush Roundtable episode 221. Get on board because it's time for Limbo. I'm your host, Liam, and with me is Alex, Paul, Ralph, and Nick. So we come to the instrumental of Test for Echo. What are your first thoughts on this particular track?
They begin with hemispheres.
Yes.
The intro chords are it's the F sharp 11, not added 11. It's an 11. It's the way music theory works, how we build our chords in our Western culture. So it's that F sharp 11 going up to the A, but then he goes up to the B and an E. So he's kind of beginning with a familiar, but takes it off into a little bit of a different dimension there. And then for his, like, he does that I think twice. Lifeson, obviously, I'm talking about, and if you didn't already know. And then for that next go round of 8 measures, I think it was, he's hits the F sharp. But then he brings in a little more B and a little more E. So like F sharp E back to B, then to the G. So he's kind of, as for a lot of the songs on the album, kind of blends a couple of key signatures at the same time, because that's one of the things we love about him.
Yes, and from a drummer's point of view, just like to point out that intro fill is absolutely incredible. Starting off with a snare fill and then playing around the kit before launching into the song. An incredible Neil moment on the album, I must say.
I'll go ahead, Ralph.
I was watching a work in progress where Neil was talking about this, and he would plan to do a 16 bar drum solo that section, and he recorded it, worked it out, figured it out, just kind of improved it, and then gave it to Getty, and Getty cut it up into 4 different parts and throughout the song. And I think that beginning fill is one of those.
Yes, we kind of noticed and we discussed it before recording pre-hand. The time signature is actually pretty simple in terms of a rush because it's all under 4, but it's also variations on 2 and then 3 and then 6 and then back to 4. So quite a bit of an easygoing song in terms of time signatures for a rush song, which is a bit out of the blue. What do you guys
Well,
think about that?
Well, but I mean, at that point, just living in 4/4. I mean, obviously, it's where do you put the accents? It's how are you grouping your notes? I mean, you could have your 2 measures, and even though this song doesn't, but you could have your 2 measures of 4/4, and maybe you have a 15 note phrase as a 16th note figure, and so it's 15 notes, 17 notes, something like that. So it's 4/4 doesn't have to be boring or typical. It's just kind of your playground. What are you going to do on top of it?
Yeah. And we also common noticed that the song features a bit of sampling as well with the Monster Mash, Where is My Transylvania Twist and Mash Good. Is there any background information to why they use this as a particular sample, or was just something I thought, hey, maybe fits?
Well,
Yes.
yeah, go ahead,
Go
Ralph.
ahead. No, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, man.
Sorry, I'm sorry. In Jam Showbiz from 1996, Neil said he had been stuck on Monster Mash, and he was trying to use the internet to search for the lyrics, but couldn't find them. And so Peter Collins went out and bought the CD, and they wound up thought that'd be funny to use some of the samples,
Yes,
and
it's
then they had to pay money to use them. So
I was just gonna say I read that passage today too, just to kind of figure out
okay,
what the background was on that sample, but they had
right,
they had to pay for the fees to copy because it's copyrighted, right?
right, yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
they just wanted to make a fun part and a fun song, and they had to pay for it.
yeah, and they used not just the wording, but they used the like the door and everything at the beginning.
The actual sound effects, yeah.
All those different sound effects. Funny enough, too, Limbo is also mentioned in Dante's Inferno, which was something that I know Neil. I read in one of his logs a long time ago. I remember him mentioning. So I'm wondering if this was around the time he read that, but I could be wrong on that. But I do remember him mentioning and reading that at some point. So I don't know if that's connected, but it's very interesting how the song is like almost it's almost like a Halloween tune kind of in that sense. It's almost a spirit slash spiritual kind of song. Um,
It's got
Yeah,
that
I
feel to it.
guess.
Plus
Yeah,
boats.
the boats, yes, and being in the state of limbo, being sort of stuck in one motion, timeless and whatever.
Well,
I
Getty's
think
kind of
they also had the
vocalization.
pun.
Now you go, Ralph.
I also had the pun of Rush Limbo. I think they were going with that joke too. So.
Oh yeah.
hmm.
Well, and that's the thing. If you go on and search Rush Limbo as the song, you're going to get a long list of Rush Limbaugh videos. And of course, he did kind of gain a certain widespread notoriety in like 1992, that time frame. So he clearly was established by 96. Yeah.
That is an
Yeah.
interesting search. I encountered that today actually.
Yeah.
Went to throw the song on in the background while I was working just to start because I hadn't listened to it in a while. And of course, I went to good old YouTube because I was on my computer and I typed in Rush Limbo and I was like, oh, forgot, gotta specify. Like hadn't done that in a while and clicked on the right one and pulled up one of the versions on there. So yeah, it was kind of funny and that's typical Rush humor. I mean, that's typical of those guys.
Yes.
Mm.
And obviously the live version as well. I believe it plays very much better live on the Tesferico tour. Was
Mm.
anyone here in attendance for the 96-97 tour and perhaps wanted to share some thoughts on how it sounded live?
I saw that last week. I realized that I kept thinking I saw it in July, but that tour ended on July 4th in Toronto. So it was actually the end of June of 97 that I saw them in Western New York. And even saying it a couple weeks ago, I definitely the big standout from this album really was Virtuality. I gotta admit, Limbo didn't really, I'm not saying it didn't register, but it's, there's certain other songs that were a little, as I said, more standoutish than Limbo was. I mean, rewatching the video after reversing it, so it's Limbo then Rush, and you can immediately get that tour. It's sort of, yeah, that had a certain vibe, a certain animation, I should say.
Yeah. It's kind of like when you think about the whole entirety of Tesferico, it's kind of the one that's kind of the odd one out, in my opinion. Would you guys agree to that?
I wouldn't. I think the next song, I don't even remember where it is because it's something to stone. I don't really.
Carvoy.
It
Avoid the
doesn't
stone.
fit, to me. It doesn't even fit the album. It
Mm.
sounds like a left. It sounds like a leftover from like the roll the bones and counterparts. It doesn't even fit to me. Um,
Almost like a filler, maybe.
yeah, like they need one more song. They just threw it on there. I don't know if it was or it wasn't. I know, but to me, you mentioned with the live sound, I think Limbo is just another example of why the Test for Echo album to me is possibly the best album translated to live music. Um, it really, especially when you listen to those songs performed in the '90s, you listen to on different stages, even, and then the Molson, when you watch the Molson shows, I really think Test for Echo translates well to live. And I mean, this album was kind of it was the last album till their long hiatus, and they were
Mm.
kind of getting a little tired. You can hear it in some of the songs. I mean, we mentioned the simplicity of the timing. I mean, Limbo in all apparently Limbo was kind of a bits and pieces of other sound recordings thrown together. I mean,
Well,
that's
I think it was more that it was they probably each had some riffs. So they were kind
yeah,
of coming up with putting their riffs together into an instrumental.
yeah. So I mean, that's the thing. Like to me, I think that despite all that, though, I think this album just really, I think that maybe because of the simplicity, I think the album just
Mm.
really translates to live well. And I generally like live music better, but I love the live version of this song. But I like the studio version too. It's one of those ones where I can listen to either and be happy with it. I think the
Yeah.
recording on Test for Echo is a very high quality recording, and I think this song in particular definitely personally, I think it might be the best sounding song on the album. Um, just my opinion.
To your point, the simplicity maybe is the reason that some people just can't get into the album because to
Yeah.
them it's not traditional.
Mhm.
Like
Well,
for most of us, we always for the bulk of the fans who were there during the classic era, they're used to that, the complexity and the long songs and all that. And by the time this album came around in '96 and it was obviously panned by critics and what have you, it's probably, not as stayed as a favorite album, but we've come to love it as a collective later on.
it's
As a
funny.
as a collective is strong, but
Yeah.
some still can't get around to the album. But
Well, the thing I think of with especially with what Nick's saying there, that they had the youth of themselves playing. Um, I don't say this in a negative way, but they themselves would probably recognize and have said kind of that they might have been a little derivative of their influences. That's part of being 20, 22, 24. And Neil saying that they became themselves at moving pictures, so that they had that 70s touring. They were exploring the progressive rock, and then okay, now we're going to bring in the synths and the post new wave and other influences that might have informed some of their songwriting. And then okay, let's return to rock. By the end of the 80s, certainly into the 90s, counterparts. This was definitely a rock album, and that's where but they have the experience. So it's not, oh, we're 22 and we're still learning. It's basically, oh, we're, past 30, we're hitting 40. And basically they kind of could rock out in a way where they had a greater sense of who they were, who they are. And yeah, I agree. This is a stripped down and just a much better album than most people remember, basically.
at
Yeah,
this
it's
point, I
kind
think it was brought up at this point that they've been getting tired. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's they had pumped out what 16 albums in 22 years at this point,
Yeah.
which is unheard of. And I mean, I don't, but that the hiatus, as much as we know why it happened, did it do them some good? Maybe.
Maybe.
Kind
Two
of
interesting, two other albums that came out in that time period that make me think of pretty much going through the same thing. The Division Bell came out just a few years before that. That was Pink
90,
Floyd's
90,
last true
90
album.
94.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And We Can't Dance, the last Genesis album, came out. And those are both bands that usually you're going to find a lot of crossover in fans. At least that's in my experience. At least for me, that's the truth. And
Mhm.
it's interesting how that's like it for those two bands in the 90s. You kind of see that cutoff. And all three albums, I like all of them. And funny enough, I was just this weekend listening to, because of I had been listening to Test for Echo thanks to talking to Ryan to come on here and talk about Limbo. And for whatever reason, I've been listening to the Division Bell and We Can't Dance for some reason. And as I'm listening to it, I do get that sense that it's just we're getting, the musicianship is still there because these guys are so talented, but they're also so experienced, right? This is their 16th album or however many it's been. So they've got 16 albums worth of experience writing and producing together. So it's still going to have a quality. And again, that's why I think it translates so well live. And that's why going back to Limbo, I think that even though yes, it's simple, yes, it's often forgotten about, I still think it's a great tune with a lot of creativity. I mean, including the monster mash in it. Like, who does that? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's still very much pure Rush right there. That's still very much in line with how they are and who they were then, and who they, I mean, still pretty much are now.
A
Yes,
nice little acknowledgement of their childhood too.
Mm-hmm.
the Stooges, Monster Mash,
Mm.
all these things scattered throughout their career. And Test for Echo really could be them reflecting on obviously the rock roots of the past with the debut Fly By Night, Caress of Steel, and all those albums, and then coming back to that type of sound in Test for Echo. So it's kind of like a reflection on their career up to this point.
Even to the point that Neil wanted to change up his drumming a little bit, so he got lessons from Freddie Gruber. I
Mhm.
find you hear that influence in Test for Echo. The drumming sounds different. Like I personally like I hear it in Limbo a lot. Some of just the way the fills are done and the way that flows, I'm like
Very
it's
smooth.
smooth. It's not your
Yes.
typical, it's not your prototypical Neil just banging the crap out of the drums and but he still is. If you watch the DVD, you know, he still bangs the crap out of him, but it's a different flow. It's more, I guess, melodic maybe. But in Limbo, you really hear the way the way the fills are going, especially the first one. It's more just fluid, and that's what the
Yeah.
big thing with Freddie Gruber was, his fluidity, time,
Oh,
right? Just
you hear it with that opening bass line with Getty. I mean, you can hear. I mean, you hear the bass line after the sound effects, right? And so you're kind of focused on that. But as usual, when you take a second and listen for Neil's drums, you're like, oh, that's different, and it is very different. It's very smooth. You can almost. I mean, I'm not a drummer. I don't drum. I don't have a pair of drums. I can't. I barely can make my two hands function separately. You know what I'm saying? I can't drum, and even I can hear the flip of the hand and the just the difference in how he had been drumming even on Roll the Bones 2 albums earlier. And mind you, Limbo was almost a continuation. Starting with Roll the Bones, they had 3 straight albums with an all instrumental.
Mhm.
And there you can hear slight similarities between. You can tell they're from the same era. Basically, you can tell Where's My Thing, Leave That Thing Alone, and Limbo are all kind of from the same era. And but again, the drums on Limbo are very different sounding from like Leave the Thing Alone. That opening, very heavy smack in the drums, and then Limbo, it's very smooth, like you said, Paul. So I completely agree with that.
Yeah, it's more polished and refined in terms of production for Neil, especially with that new influence there. I was looking at Sterling Feat's cover just to get like the overhead shot of what the actual pattern looks like. You can definitely see it. It's more sophisticated throughout with the ride pattern as it carries through the song. And obviously filling in here with a bit of toms and a bit of splash here and there.
and I think this
Make a
is when
difference.
he started using the more traditional grip with his left hand.
Yes.
And that's part of it, I think, was because of the physical issues he was having with his tendons and his shoulders and his elbows and stuff, right? From 30 odd years of beating the crap out of the drums. So it does that, right? And that was also the first album where he played the DW drums. So that's what he would finish with DW for the rest of his career. But yeah, no, it's a great song. And we haven't mentioned the part where Getty just has this haunting.
Yep, the vocalizations.
The vocalization in the background, but it's just enough in the back that it's really haunting. Went back to that Halloween theme almost, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
It's echoing. It just takes command of the stage.
Well, he's a front man.
Of course.
It fits the you've got the totem imagery on the front of the album, right? The little statue and sort of the Alaskan Native American vibes, right? But also like the satellites and the kind of eeriness, as well as the modernity.
Modernity.
Modernity. Modernity.
We'll
My goodness.
get there.
Yeah, we'll get there somehow.
Don't even get started on an Inukshuk.
Right? And you have all three of those things on this album blended in together. I mean, just in the artwork alone, you see it with the snow and the satellites. And so I think you hear every bit of that cover and the back in this particular song with Getty's vocals, along with the Monster Mash being in there.
Well, one of the things I think of too, like the live version of this, and even just watching the video from that tour. I mean, Getty, like with Double Agent, he knew how to work the samples that they play with. Because you could tell that some of the vocals were sampled, but he was also singing with them because there was a larger sound that is not one human being singing, and he would know enough, obviously, to step up to the mic, much like with Double Agent before that spoken section. It's sort of, well, this is my voice. I'm going to step up to the mic so that way I'm not way over there by Lifeson, and then my voice is coming out here and people are freaking out. There's just, as I say, to me that live version just had a certain element of professionalism and just the strategy of knowing how to use their electronics in that live environment.
Yes.
Here's a question for everybody. Could on Clockwork Angels, R40, and even Test for Echo, or Test for excuse me, Time Machine Tour. Could they have done this song, and would it have fit in with all those sets?
Ooh. Well, considering that they were bringing back stuff that they hadn't played in like donkey's years, possibility. Very strong possibility.
But of all the songs you want to pick, would you pick Limbo?
It's a pretty deep cut. It's an obscure one.
It'd be for a lot of fans at these concerts would have been a head scratcher. Like, geez, of all the songs
What?
from Test for Echo or Counterparts, this is what you pick. You know what I mean? Like, because I think if I remember correctly, on R40 they picked is it Animate from
Mhm.
Counterparts. I don't think they played
Yeah.
anything from Test for Echo.
They played.
No.
I think they only played
I
two.
can't remember.
They only played 2 songs from Test for Echo post the Test for Echo tour. The rest of their career, I believe it was
Okay.
Driven and Resist, and that was it. They didn't play.
Well, Resist, they had that acoustic
and
version
it was
on
acoustic
R30.
only too. And they
Yeah.
played it on. They played it in Rio, and they played it on R30,
Mhm.
and that was it. And they
And I
didn't.
just dropped the album.
Yeah, and that's it. They just dropped it. And again, the question begs, to be asked: is this an album that they just kind of threw together? I mean, we're talking about the simplicity and everything. The fact that they just didn't care to. I mean, you want to talk about songs they didn't play post, the year 2000. They talked about how Neil talked about how like some of those early, the early albums they really didn't like as much because they felt like they had grown beyond and they didn't feel it was their best work. So you don't hear all those songs, but you hear more songs from the first 3 albums. And I'm not even including like Working Man. All right. You hear more songs from those first 4 albums post 2000 than you do Test for Echo, an album that came out rather late in their career that's very refined and had decent, reception and had a big tour attached to it. So
Although I would say for anyone who would read Ghost Rider and what Neil said in quite a few of his diary entries and letters to people, I wouldn't doubt it if there's a good possibility that Neil wanted to kind of shake this album away because it was the album and the tour leading up to
Yeah.
the most
The events.
punching events of his life. So I mean that's the thing I wonder is that they might have said, okay, let's play this, we'll play this. And just the idea that if it's like you got the guy with a bass and the guy with a guitar playing Resist, while the guy who was just doing a monster drum solo went backstage to regroup, he's not necessarily paying attention to them. He's got his people saying, all right, let's make sure you're together for the rest of the set. So to me, it would make sense that it might also just be the possibility that they push this album aside because he's like, yeah, I really don't want to hear this.
Yeah,
Possibly.
because it's like he said, too close to the big tragic event of his life.
Yeah.
So understandable, very understandable, but it left behind so many well-polished, well-defined songs. Would have been great to see the title track come back, for example,
Mm.
on a later tour. That would have been
Yeah.
amazing.
be real fitting today.
Yeah.
How do you build? But for those tours like Time Machine and R30 and R4, how do you build a set list that's gonna, you know what I mean? Like it's hard. You've got almost 4 decades worth of music you got to pick from. It's and you're not going to please everybody, right? Like it's
Yeah.
And you're trying
And
not to
it's-
just play. You're trying not just play hits, right? Or at least the best
Right.
songs off an album, but at the same time, some of those best known songs from like the early '90s and late '80s become deep cuts because they're still mostly known for their late '70s, early '80s stuff. So a song like Limbo, you're right. It's like you said, who we'd all be like, okay, we're playing Limbo. I personally, if they were playing an R40, I'd have been like, oh, let's go. Like I'd have been excited.
Yeah.
But and I'm sure a lot of other fans would have been like, okay, but it would have been like, could have played
From that album, any other song,
any other song from that album except for the Stone song, and it would have been all been really excited.
You can't even say the title.
I don't remember it.
Carve
Carve
away the stone.
Okay, there we go. I skip it every time. I skip it every time.
I
That's
like it. I genuinely like it, but this is Limbo, so that's a different one.
Limbo. Now, here's a question for everyone too that I thought of. One thing that we haven't like really talked about is this really more of a Getty Neal track, And does Alex? Do you all agree that Alex kind of disappears? I mean, he's just playing very basic. He's not. There's no solo. There's nothing.
I don't think he's as present as Leave That Thing Alone and Where's My Thing.
Yes.
He's there, but I kind of agree with you, Nick. He's a bit not. I don't want to say in the background, but it's not as front and center. Like I find it's the bass line and the drums that kind of.
Well, there were a lot of times in their career when he was saying, I don't think we should put a solo on this song. And like The Camera Eye was a good example where he said, I don't think that deserves a solo. And a lot of us would look at that as one of the best, from way back when. There were various other songs in this album where his solo section was really more of an interlude, more melodic, not really tearing it up, because you do that on 16 albums and it's like, all right, how much more pentatonic do I need to do? And that's the thing when it comes to structuring an instrumental. You look at people like Joe Satriani or Vi or whatever, and or even YYZ or Z, depending on where you live. The idea there is you have your instrumental. Okay, no one's singing, but we can still have our intro. We can have a verse, quote unquote, section. I'll refrain from air quotes. It's a Gen X thing. Just deal with it. And then the idea there is you have like that chorus section. Well, is it really? Well, we got this section. Now we got this section. We're going back to this section. We're going back to this section. Well, it's verse, chorus, verse, chorus. So I'd say Lifeson with this was more, maybe he wasn't really feeling it, as far as like, I don't really need to go all Satriani on this one, but he's thinking like, because some of the sections he has, like he brings in harmonics in a melodic fashion, much like with Red Barchetta. And he brought in more harmonics on this album, more harmonics on Snakes and Arrows, and for the rest of their career, basically, he brought in a lot more than that than he had played on Counterparts or Roll the Bones or Presto. So there's like this harmonic section that is kind of a little more ethereal, and then he does have some of his higher fretted, arpeggiated-ish lines with open strings. I'm just going to say that might be reminiscent of, say, the Trees interlude before the solo. Not exactly the same, but in the same vein as. So there are sections where he's clearly doing his thing, and exploring maybe some past things to bring them into the modern sense. And I feel like that's maybe, to me, a sense of some of what they were doing at that time was saying, well, we want to be who we are, but acknowledge who we were as young rock dudes. But can we do it in the now? What were some of these elements? Well, okay, I got this progression with the Lifeson chord. I almost made air quotes with Lifeson chord. Thank you. That it's like a scene in Heathers. But it's basically I'll quickly stop talking here. I know I'm dominating. It's the sort of thing where he basically, I feel like Lifeson alone is bringing back some older personal tropes to modernize them. Basically, is my long way of saying it. So I'm going to mute because I should.
Let me rephrase that. Is this song as balanced as the other instrumentals? I mean, you mentioned YYZ, and to me, that song is perfectly balanced between all four instruments. All four get a chance to have their moment to shine. Neil's drums and Geddy's bass, of course, go back and forth a bunch, and then we switch over, and Alex gets a couple little mini solos, and then even Geddy's synths get to come in and get their own little part. Whereas this song, I guess to me, I don't. So I don't know. That's what what I was trying to ask is, do we feel it's as some of these other ones?
I think this song's more of a rhythm-based section. It's more of a, like you said, it's a Geddy Piet song. There's very little Alex Lifeson that's very distinctive. So it's basically more of a rhythm section jam type of song, in my opinion.
Kind of reminiscent of. Oh, sorry, Ralph. Go ahead.
I was just saying, there's no like real riff that stands out that Alex is doing.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was going to say it's reminiscent of Malignant Narcissism, where Geddy and Neil kind of jammed together to it, and then Alex came in like a month later and had to add guitar to it. So he kind of went, see what I can do, like. So it's not. I don't think all. I'm not sure. I can't say for Limbo if all three were equally involved, but I don't. Alex's parts just they seem to blend in more than the earlier instrumentals. But that's the drummer talking. I don't have much of a brain, so. But
I could probably say the same thing.
I hit things with sticks,
I mean, I agree with you, Paul. I mean, shoot, even Snakes and Arrows comparatively, you're right about Malignant Narcissism. But I guess the difference being is on that album, he got a whole song just to himself. So
true. Basically, yeah. Here's a bass and the drums. Do whatever you want to do with it. So he okay,
Yes.
But,
okay.
but I think, but the mind frame was completely different between Test for Echo time frame and Snakes and Arrows. Like I think Test for Echo, I think it's documented. They were getting tired of the constant touring and the constant being on the road, and they're in their early 40s at this point, being on the go nonstop for 20 odd years. And not that it decreased the quality of the songs, but I think they were starting to kind of talking about taking a break, take longer breaks between albums and tours, right? So
the mindset changes.
I was just in agreement with you, Paul, on Malignant Narcissism being very similar to Limbo, where it's kind of a more Geddy Neal song. The differences on Snakes and Arrows is Alex got hope. He got to put in a whole acoustic guitar song. So it kind of balanced out, album-wise, it kind of balanced out and worked.
And to be honest, Malignant Narcissism was just Geddy goofing off on a fretless bass between singing takes. And Nick recorded it and was like, what was that? And he's like, I don't know. Like just, and you want another instrument on the album? Okay, let's make it 3. Like it's, but we had none in Vapor Trails and we had none in Clockwork Angels. So I guess it made up for the other 2 albums, maybe.
I mean, I would say, especially coming from, the standpoint of someone who's been, I started playing guitar because of the Alex Lifes, and then a lot of people who might watch this could say the same thing. So I've been pretty conscientious of his style and his early style when in the 70s was, post Jimmy Page, we're doing the prog thing. Then by the 80s, yes, he started to shift in the 80s because he had to play around the synths, bring in the strats. And then in the 90s, by this album to me is like a real distinct beginning of a different style to the end of their career, because he became more strummy. Whereas in the 80s, he was very arpeggiated. In the 70s, very riff, kind of representing, who they were, where they were, the industry in which they were playing. And, music, metal took a bit of a backseat in the 90s, as the metal coming out of the 80s, Megadeth, Metallica, Slayer, Maiden. So you started to see the metal that was more Korn and Limp Bizkit becoming a thing, System of a Down, then getting into so you see these changes in the industry, and you see these changes in the individuals who are playing in the industry. And for me, if I keep it on the Lifeson thing, as I say, he started really doing a lot of overdubbing. He was doing a lot more strumming, 16th notes and whatnot. Geddy was taking more of the riffs. So as I say, I feel like he's present, he's there, but it's more like an introduction to this is who he's becoming, certainly on the successive albums. But that's my opinion. I'm just an obsessive fan.
Do we have anything else to add for Limbo, or you reckon we've covered everything?
Just a couple quick facts. I have the work in progress companion note, and the first section where he caught the harmonics are, Neil, I don't know, it's called the Oriental section. And then the second time he calls it tribal tabla, which are hand drums from India. And the chorus is called Caravan of Camels. Just thought that was interesting.
Well, that's very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we're all put all the facts out of the way, we got one more.
I got one more. Where is going around real quick with everyone? When it comes to the 8 instrumental, right? 8 instrumentals they have, official instrumentals. Where you rank this one at?
Okay. Well,
I'm not asking for a
Sevens.
whole top 8, but I mean, what are you putting it up above, and then we can kind of figure out what's above it from there.
Ooh,
I
okay.
I unfortunately I'd put it 6, 7, or 8. It's in the bottom 3 for me personally.
Yeah, it's one of the more weaker
Bottom
ones, I'm
half.
going to say.
Yeah.
Bottom half, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd say bottom half for
And
me as well.
I mean, you're putting in the same basket La Villa and YYZ, you know.
The real strong ones.
Well, there's got to be a top for there to be a bottom, and there's got to be a bottom for them to be a top and a middle.
Yeah,
But like Alex, I think the bottom half. I think Limbo would fall. It's a good song, but it's not a standout song. Like I wouldn't be able to put top 3 instrumentals.
no.
Personally, that's just me. But that's, like I said, music's subjective. I mean, anyone might have a different opinion. But
I mean, to me, the top. I think most people are going to put Vila and YYZ at 1, 2, and alternating.
Somewhere top 3, yeah.
And after that, it's okay. I mean, for me, I'm putting Limbo above Malignant Narcissism. I know that's probably a little bit hot take. See, Malignant Narcissism just to me is kind of just kind of
Yeah.
It was all right. To me, it's honestly my least favorite of their instrumentals.
Hey,
I'm probably
Fair
also
enough.
putting it above Hope, but that's also probably because I like the heavier sound. But after that, yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not going against the other two 90s ones.
Let's throw in Bruin's Bane from Exit Stage Left. That's number 9. Okay,
I'm putting Bruin's Bane above it.
Yeah, I was thinking Bruin's Bane too. Yeah.
I love Bruin's Bane. It's just it just sounds so. Yeah,
I'm putting O'Malley's whatever it was, the Time Machine tour solo. I got to see O'Malley's Break. I got to see the record version live in person, and honestly, I'd put that above. I love that little tune. I would put that above Limbo as well. So I love this song. It's a great boat song. It's a great summer song. Blasted a lot on summer on the lake, but and it's a great sunset song. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a weaker instrumental, but it's one of my favorite Test for Echo tracks.
Yeah. I guess when you look at it from a drummer's point of view, it's definitely a strong point of showing off the new traditional style that Neil was going for. So from a drummer's point of view, a very, very fantastic track.
Yeah. And sonically fantastic, the record version. Got to reiterate that. Very compared to especially to me compared to how their early 80s stuff. I mean, I've said on these shows a lot in the past that I think Moving Pictures is a terribly recorded album. And I think Test for Echo's sound is right up there with counterparts and Power Windows, in my opinion.
Ooh.
Oh, I'd have to agree with that. Like, you mean like the recording, the mix?
Yeah.
How it comes.
Yeah.
How it sounds, Power Windows counterparts, Test for Echo. They're probably on top of their game. That's Peter Collins, right?
Mm-hmm.
But,
yes. There. Well, if we're all good, we'll close the chapter on this Limbo. Thank you very much for watching another episode of Rush Roundtable. Be sure to support the coffee as always. We can keep all this going. Check out the merch below in the description. And if you like what you see, subscribe for more. But until then, we'll see you at the next Roundtable here on Rush Fans.